Should I sit down here? Is this good? Hi. I like this setup with the tables and it's like more intimate. Okay, so content and kids. Content on YouTube, kids. There's, not much controversy there. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about in this. And I figured that today we could sort of, because we've got a mix of, you're both a researcher, but with Google, YouTube, you're doing research, and you're obviously with Common Sense. So we could sort of give a lay of the land of what are the issues, where's the research going, what's like the tip of the spear on research, what are you guys doing to address some of the problems? And then kind of what you're hearing from parents about what they want. So just to kick it off, give me a sense of what's the research right now? What are the next stories I should do on this? What are you thinking about?
Sure. All right, so I'm Jenny Radetzky. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician. I practice at University of Michigan. I'm an NIH-funded researcher. I'm going to say hi to my kids who are watching the live stream. Go to bed. I love you. And I'm a mom of two awesome kids. So I've been really interested in content and the design of digital media because I feel like changing design is such a powerful way of changing human behavior. As we've heard throughout today, is that there's a lot of intentional design that meant to persuade or change human behavior, sometimes for positive effects, sometimes for ill effects, sometimes in ways that young minds can't resist, as we just heard. So I really think it's a powerful conversation to be having, especially with folks who work in technology. When thinking about content, it was a lot easier as a researcher to study content in the 70s and 80s when it was like, we are studying Power Rangers versus Mr. Rogers. Like you could really do analyses of the pro-social messaging, of the diversity of the people portrayed, of the amount of violence. It is so much harder to study content right now, number one, because there's so much content. It's cheap to make. No one has to wait for it to be produced and put on network TV. A lot of it is user-generated content. And it also has this new layer. It's not just the programming that you're watching. There's also the design layers on top of that, like autoplay, like algorithms, like lots and lots of interactivity and data collection that just make it a lot more complicated to study. So I'd say the way I frame it is, number one, there is the underlying content in terms of what are the messaging, what's the implicit or informal learning a child might be doing, from watching an unboxing video, which might have commercial messaging in it, or from watching a really funny or pro-social video that's showing a lot of empathy. Then there's also the kind of salient characteristics, the bells, the whistles, the light effects, the sound effects. They're like clinking coins that go into your piggy bank when you're playing a game. These researchers have known are really distracting elements that especially young brains, so I study usually kids under 5, don't yet have the impulse inhibition to ignore. They get so stuck on all those bells and whistles that they're not always getting the underlying meaning of the content. Or their eye gaze is so fascinated on what's going on with all the bells and whistles that they're not really looking up to their parent to say like, hey, how do I contextualize this new knowledge in the rest of my world? Really, they're very focused on these kind of concrete aspects of design. And then there are aspects on top of that that aren't even part of the content. So one of our studies that came out last fall was looking at the advertising that pops up kind of in between levels or runs along the bottom of apps or is hidden in little sparkling snowmen or bouncing GIFs that as kids are playing apps, they may be bringing up ads without even knowing it. So that's a whole other layer that's now a natural part of the digital ecosystem. It's
illegal, right? Like what they're doing, they're advertising in all kinds of like secret ways that violate various.
There are no laws about in-app advertising for kids right now. So when we did this study, we really wanted to just describe what do kids encounter when they, open up a kids app that's advertised for kids 5 and under. And so we found lots of things we expected to see, like banner ads, some of them for adult-appropriate content, like tax preparation. But a lot of them were also kind of built into the gamification of the game so that you could get more coins, you could get better gameplay items if you watched ad after ad after ad. Yeah. And the app developer benefits with the more ads that are viewed during their free app. So this is the complexity that we're dealing with right now in the research. And I'd say there's really not a lot yet. Like you mentioned YouTube Kids. I have not seen a single research study on YouTube Kids either, because it's really hard to capture either by tracking kids' devices or just through parents' memory.
Before we go to you, what would you want to study about YouTube Kids? What would you be worried about that you'd want to dig into?
The basics is like, what are kids attracted to? So my practice in developmental behavioral peds is I care about each individual kid, how they're wired. I play with them, and I try and figure out what are their strengths, what are their challenges, how does that impact how they're parented, what therapies they need. And so I'm really interested in the ways that young kids' strengths and challenges influence their relationship with media. So are they the sorts of kids that love just watching Let's Play videos, where they just want to sit back and watch other kids play Minecraft for hours and hours? Or are they kids who are going to go to YouTube Kids and be like, I just heard about the Aurora Borealis. I want to look that up, and then I'm going to go talk to my mom about it. I want to have a dance party with my sister. So that's unknown, and that's just like the very beginning of what I'd want to study.
Yeah.
Shall I dive in?
Yeah, I mean, just in preparing for this, I looked up the New York Times plus YouTube Kids, right? And it's been a doozy of a couple years. It's been like advertisers boycott YouTube after pedophiles swarm comments on videos of children. YouTube is improperly collecting children's data, consumer groups say. YouTube Kids criticized for content, introduces new parental controls. It's been a doozy of a couple years. How are you approaching this right now? Kind of what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think, so let me just say I joined Google about 6 months ago, so I'm kind of relatively new to a very large company which covers a lot of different issue areas, from YouTube to like maps.
Yeah.
And so there's a really big and very varied and complex set of issue areas that come along with having such a kind of wide remit. And obviously also, whilst my remit is kids and families, kids stretches across a big age range, right? And so issues thinking about, social media use by teens is very different from like what content is appropriate for a 3-year-old.
Honing in on just like the sort of content, the kids'
So there's so many
stuff.
different kind of range of issues. And I think one thing that's been useful for me, I think, is coming from a research background. I'm an anthropologist by training, so I think we always have that sort of professional outsider kind of lens on things, and is really thinking about, how to translate the kind of research world, both, research from a variety of different disciplines, but also research that I myself have done over the last kind of 6 or 7 years, which has really been close to parents' experiences.
What are you pushing for? What are you like specifically?
And I think that's a great question. So I think that one of the things, thinking about YouTube Kids, for example, and to Jenny's point, is actually, one of the things that I think is really interesting for me is the way that YouTube Kids functions as a really different platform than, for example, like a Netflix or an Amazon or a broadcaster, right? Like it's an information engine in a different way than a lot of other channels are. So actually, when we think about quality, for example, some of the videos that are really popular are things like trains leaving a station, and like a whole channel of people who love train videos. And they're not like high quality, and they don't necessarily have like great production values, for example, but they're really loved, and they, there's all these train enthusiasts, and like that's not on other kinds of channels, right? So how do we think about, elevating and like catering for these interests? And some of it's weird, and some of it's wonderful, and some of it's like pretty mainstream, there's a really big variety. So I think, when I think about the kind of set of challenges and things that we think about is, one, to like honor and cater to that diversity at the same time as still, like creating safeguards that make sure that our platform is like basically safer and as safe as possible. And honestly, also to our earlier conversation today, thinking about like what are the tools at our disposal on, these big platforms. Google's a big place, it's a lot of content, and how can we organize that content and surface it in a way that is like meeting the need of the person or the kid or the family at that time without, content that we don't want to have on our platform slipping through. So I think that's obviously something that, you rightly identify as preoccupied a lot of our time and effort. And I think we're in a position as a big company that we're able to move quite quickly when, unfortunately, we do identify content that shouldn't be there. One of the things I think, we are exploring and thinking a lot about is like, what does this concept of quality mean, and how can we apply some of the lessons that we've learned, from machine learning, from, policy development? How can we apply that to something that's maybe harder to identify, like quality?
All this stuff you're saying is like the same stuff that's been identified 5 years ago. Like, okay, we want to have better content filters. We want to make this better. We want to make that better. Like, the problems are obvious. The problems are laid out. Now is kind of the time that everyone's feeling like, okay, now it's like solution time. Now it's like, we know that bad content is slipping through to kids on YouTube.
So I would say the YouTube Kids of today is a really different platform than it was 5 years ago. So I'm not sure it existed 5 years ago, 2015, so 4 years ago. And actually, we've made a lot of strides in terms of the way the platform is set up. For example, last year we launched a fully whitelisted mode, parent-approved mode. We worked with third parties to create kind of collections around different kinds of content. The machine learning and algorithmic work that sits behind the platform is so much more sort of sophisticated and elaborate than it was even at the time that we launched, let alone even in the last year. So I think it's really important to think about there's movement over time. It's really important to identify kind of where the kind of specificities are that we're seeing issues. Also, one thing I think maybe we haven't done well enough on is really kind of integrating a lot of the kind of digital citizenship or awareness raising resources into the platforms themselves. So for example, because different things, because different families have different kinds of values and different kinds of things that they want their kids to see, we want to encourage parents to kind of play an active role in curating and creating experiences. Parent approved, I think, is a really great and very well received tool, but I think there's certainly more we can do there as well.
Are you surprised, and you guys just are you surprised how powerful this has become? YouTube Kids has become in a lot of ways the TV, the babysitter, it's become a foundational tool for modern parents in many homes. And what do you make of that? Is that good? Is that bad? Has it become too relied upon? Or are you no, this is what we intend for it to do, it's educational or whatever? What do you make of its role now in 2019 families?
I'm not sure it's YouTube Kids specifically. Netflix is also really widely used. So I think maybe what you're identifying is digital media generally plays such an important role in family life. And this is something, obviously, that I've reflected on for many years. Sorry.
It kind of became the safe haven.
Yeah,
I think,
it became the safe haven. It's marketed as a safe haven.
When it launched, kids were already on YouTube. We know that the preschool channels on YouTube are extremely popular. Intro YouTube Kids, and parents feel like, oh, this is going to be a safe walled garden experience for my kid.
Yeah.
Which in some ways it's aiming to be, but I think many parents would argue that it could do better. YouTube Kids also, just by the nature of the way kids use digital media and the fact that we've put swiping and voice remotes into the hands of babes, it has a pretty short shelf life.
Literally.
So kids graduate pretty quickly onto the larger YouTube landscape. So they may go to YouTube Kids for a minute, jump back over to YouTube proper, and all bets are off.
You guys are doing sort of the most research in terms of figuring out how much time kids are actually spending on these things. What would you say sort of the average American 5-year-old?
Well, across media, it's 9 hours a day.
Yeah.
But that's across.
Yeah.
And I think it's YouTube today, but 2 years ago, it could have been Netflix, and in 3 years, it could be something else. I'm sure there will be an Instagram for juniors any minute now. So I can't wait. But I would imagine, so I think it ebbs and flows depending on the technology, a lot of what we're talking about today.
How effective, right before this, I ran into my friend Mark Bergen, who's a reporter, and he suggested I ask a question about the age limits on YouTube. YouTube Terms of Service says that age 12 is when you're supposed to start using it, and not below that. He
13.
Texted me the language of it, but
13.
13. How followed are those? I mean, you're doing. Is that so? Basically, that's all parents are following that, right? No one under 13 is on YouTube Kids.
Well, given that preschool channels are some of the most popular channels, I think we know right then and there that obviously kids under 13 are using YouTube.
My kids are.
Sorry?
I mean, there's lots of kids. I mean, participants in my studies that use YouTube main, even though they're not supposed to. I think because it has an appeal, that it's what the grown-ups use. It may be that the parents don't know about YouTube Kids. They don't know that there's another kind of more curated or, safe haven to watch. They just know that YouTube is, free, easy to search, gives you lots of new suggestions of what to do next. I mean, even on YouTube main, if you search for like Baby Shark videos or nursery rhyme videos, they will have like little stamps to tell you how long. Like this is 72 minutes of like little video, baby video
shark.
after baby video, so it's like, basically communicating to parents what's, how much time they have. And you're right, is that a lot of parents are using digital media as a way to keep kids occupied, keep kids calm and safe. And, when we wrote the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines in 2016, we specifically didn't say don't use media as an occupier, because lots of parents do that. I mean, we all do it, and I think that we didn't want to send a sense of judgment or, unrealistic expectations. What we did specifically say is try not to use media as a way to calm kids down, as a way to help them handle moments of distress,
as like
a way to like handle moments of boredom or like just little blow-ups that are occurring for other causes. Don't distract them from that cause. Help them solve the problem around that cause. That'll help you as a parent kind of know what's going on emotionally with them, and it helps them learn to problem solve and hopefully manage that emotion in the future. So I would say this question of like, is it good, is it bad, that it's kind of woven into our family fabric in this way, I don't think we have an answer for that. I think so much of that depends on what is viewed, how much it's viewed together versus not, and how much of it is displacing other opportunities like sleep, or like unstructured play, where the child decides what they're doing next, not the algorithm, or a parent-child kind of play exchange that lets the child interact with an adult who understands them and who can make meaning of the world just by the way they talk and experience one another. So those are the opportunity costs from more time on digital media. And we don't even know yet whether autoplay and using media that has auto advance or has other kind of persuasive design features leads to extended duration of viewing on a daily basis. That actually hasn't even been studied yet.
We just know that it annoys parents to no end.
Yeah.
Sorry, I keep laughing
you have
into
to
this.
tame that tantrum of like, shut it off, but the other one already started. And by the way, I would say this is not to demonize YouTube. Like, there is incredible content, talk about quality content, on YouTube. If my kids were seeing the YouTube that I know is possible, I would let them on all the time. But that's not what they see, and the related content is a challenge. I think
of course, it's like there's Facebook does a lot of amazing, great things for the world, as well as dangerous things. In any of these massive, enormously powerful platforms, there's good and there's bad.
And Netflix, there's incredible content available.
It seems like the platforms only respond when the bad is called out. Otherwise, they kind of like sort of pretend it doesn't exist.
I think what we're kind of hovering around is the delivery mechanism of that content, quality or otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's an algorithm. And is an algorithm the best way to feed content to our kids? Maybe
Would you
maybe
guys
not.
ever turn the autoplay feature off for YouTube Kids?
Well, one thing to say is, first of all, that's not true that we only find bad content when it's called out. So, for example, I think I would actually really encourage everyone to look at the YouTube Transparency Report, which we now publish quarterly. So there's, I think something like we took down in the first quarter of this year, we took out 800,000 pieces of content in relationship to child safety broadly. So that's any kind of content that we consider to be endangering children. So, and actually, increasingly, that content is taken down before it even has 10 views. So that's actually something like, I think we talk about algorithms as this sort of like abstract concept, and actually, obviously, and this, I think the conversation earlier today really like helped identify like algorithms are useful for different kinds of things in different kinds of moments. And I think to Jill's point, like, there's a sort of this complex interplay, and this is something that's so new to me because I'm new to industry, between like machine learning and human review. right? And like anytime we create algorithms, we create them with some kind of like level of human questioning that's kind of gone into what are we looking for? Like how do we set the parameters of what the machine learning is trying to discover? And then there's this kind of really iterative process where a set of human reviewers like looks at the content that the algorithm is turning up, they tweak it, they change it. And so that whole process is really like kind of constantly running behind the scenes and like so many different.
But my question is, would you guys ever consider turning off autoplay for the next?
So yeah, on autoplay, I think one thing that was really encouraging, for example, is when, in the last couple of years, we made the autoplay toggle itself much more prominent on YouTube. So it's like, if you look at the mobile app, if anybody has it, you can see it's like right under the videos. And actually that change has led that to be the most changed setting in all of YouTube. So like around a third of YouTube users change that setting, which just like think about how many users use YouTube and think like that's sort of a huge number because most people never change the settings that they use. And then the other thing that we've had a lot of success with is these take a break reminders that we started. So just recently we like kind of reached a milestone around that, which is 1 billion take a break reminders served. Now, I think with all of the kind of digital well-being features that we have at YouTube, and there's a host of really, I think, exciting digital well-being features that are now like kind of standard in Android operating systems as well, in addition to Family Link, which really has a host of timers and like ways that parents and children can together negotiate like what are the right rules of the road for their own family. I think all of these features are things that we can think about as kind of like a journey around behavior change, right? And like, I think one of the panelists earlier identified like, okay, we need to like think about changing our metrics, changing our kind of like rules of like what is considered success. And I think a lot of the digital well-being features and a lot of the work, and actually there's some folks in this room who've been really doing a lot of this work both on Family Link and on the Android digital well-being features, are really thinking, I think, really critically and working with the research community quite significantly to think about like, okay, how do we measure success when success is actually using our products less? And like,
but there must be some sort of data streams that you can get from smartphones that indicate well-being. I mean, we can profile so much else that if there are indicators like sleep or social contact or other things that researchers use to predict depression relapses or bipolar like manic episodes, like there are things that probably could be made into metrics to be like, yay, this person is using in a more balanced way. I know that's not a perfect solution, and it's not something I as a researcher would use. I'd want to interview that participant and kind of understand, their reflections upon it. But I mean, I think another thing I've been thinking of as you're talking, and that goes back to what Tristan was saying earlier this morning, is like when you're designing technology to kind of conform to the human needs rather than humans conforming to the technology's needs, like when you're a child, your human needs involve your secure relationships with adults around you. And user interfaces are usually just generated or are designed with one user in mind, with a child usually. So even like YouTube, Netflix, plenty of other kid-friendly or not so kid-friendly user interfaces are expecting to just be interacting with a kid rather than really explicitly involving the parent and child in some of the decision-making together or prompting conversations between them. And so I guess that's one major thing I would take away from this, is that if we're going to be thinking of designing technology that conform to children's real developmental needs, it would mean designing for the dyad or the whole family as a unit, because that's how children develop. And that's how they develop the skills that actually really matter in life. Emotional, social skills, problem solving, not just ABCs and matching colors.
Sure. So when they do graduate to those next platforms, they actually have the skills built in, and they're ready to take those on.
I think that's really right. I really, really agree with that. And I think that's also partly like a product of having done family research for the last, 7 years. And I think Family Link is an example of like where we've really used that as a kind of an organizing principle from the ground up. And I think that product, which has, it links different accounts, so parents can create a supervised account for their child, but there's also a lot of kind of outreach and support for parents that not only encourages kind of what we in the research community call restrictive mediation, so not just about setting limits, although obviously there's a lot of functionality that does that, but also around having conversations, around thinking about like what are the rules of the road. So I think there's obviously more we could do there. I think another thing that I am really aware of from my time spending a lot of time talking with parents about this is the ways in which a lot of families do use technology as a way of like supporting humane, intimate, like wonderful ways of being together. So whether it's like you use music and you dance around the kitchen, or you like curl up on the couch together. Like, you know, I've interviewed parents who use, you know, language, like videos on YouTube Kids in Portuguese because they're far from their family in Portugal or Brazil, and they want their kid to be able to learn the language their grandparent speaks, and that's like one of the ways of doing that. So I do think it's also important to think about what are the ways in which technology design, content, use can be supportive of that kind of intimacy and family life that I think so many find really valuable as well.
Jill, I know you're at the forefront of listening to parents and what they're wanting. What are parents wanting? Not to single out YouTube Kids, but what are parents wanting from these platforms to be better?
I mean, parents are on the front lines. They're the ones that are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. It's coming home. They're the ones that are getting their kids asking to watch that movie, download that app, play that new video game. And so I think at the basic level, a lot of the enhancements within the platforms need to be elevated. So putting parental controls in a place that makes more sense, where people can see them right at the top, where they have more control. In an ideal scenario, there's a stronger default setting. So you are not getting autoplay right away. That's something that you set in your device or in Netflix or YouTube. But in the bigger scheme of things, I think solutions and faster solutions to some of these. I think there's a responsibility of industry, tech, entertainment, policy. We're kind of sitting right in the middle of all of that, and we're hearing directly from parents through schools, parents directly from the consumer side. Yeah. And we are really hearing the struggles that they're having, specifically with digital media. I will say, I've been at Common Sense for 14 out of its 15 years. When I first started, everything was about violent video games and scary movies. And now parents are like, that's nothing. Like, give me a violent movie because I don't know what my kid's going to find through Google search, YouTube, the related content. For real.
Yeah, I mean, there's...
So I think that...
A shoot-'em-up video game versus just a Google search box. An empty Google search box is the most dangerous thing. Yeah.
But at least you can watch it with them. You can play along with them and like help, demystify what's going on or talk through and make some meaning out of it. I'm not encouraging playing violent video games, but I'm saying that at the AAP, we've been thinking about how do we elevate all these good ideas that can encourage real human connection around technology. And it's easy to say things like have a family movie night and co-play when your kid's playing on a gaming console. A lot easier when it's a big screen that you're sharing together compared to that, their little handheld.
Isolated.
In our recent study that was just published in Pediatrics, kids were all just like, this is mine.
Yeah, watching a movie together is retro.
Right, so it's a lot harder to get that child's body unhooked from being cocooned around the device that they find so satisfying. So I think that it's something about not only the design of the platforms that families are using, but also elevating the good ideas. And I mean, that's why we partnered with Common Sense Media at the time that the guidelines were released, because there was just a slew of good ideas on the website through the newsletters to try and get that outreach to families. But I feel like there could be more either user interface design or, I've talked with Alicia about could it be what is prioritized, what is recommended is the good stuff. Could there be a lot more PBS Kids coming up in your recommended algorithms? But I worry, as some of the conversations
that doesn't sound crazy to me. It doesn't seem, and nor does it sound that hard.
But content creators are going to get upset when they're being deprioritized.
Yeah, but so much of that content is like a 10-second clip of a train moving. Like you're saying, it's low quality, or it's really weird stuff.
But kids love that kind of stuff.
I know, but
there's oftentimes, I have daughters, but so many of my friends with boys, I mean, you ask anyone in this room, it's like, my kid loves to watch dump trucks. They love a construction site. It's sounds stereotypical, but it happens.
Yeah,
so
yeah. No,
low quality, that quality is so in the eye of the beholder. So I could point out much lower quality content on YouTube than a train leaving the station.
No, true.
Or on Netflix.
And I think another key thing that developmental research suggests is that it's also how you transfer from watching the content to then how they apply that knowledge in real life. So if you're watching dump truck video, and that's where you stay, that is a lot less meaningful than dump truck video giving you a prompt to go try something at home that has to do with dumping and physics and whatever, some sort of play activity. So PBS Kids already does this with Curious George, right? So at the end of every episode, they're like, hey, here's what you can do at home. And it's this natural kind of nudge off of the screen to go apply your knowledge.
High quality content that someone has thought through and structured and.
Well, so I want to actually do a little bit of a plug for what we call endemic content on YouTube, which is the content which is really created for YouTube and not,
Like all the strange adults doing the dancing thing?
Well, so let's just think about the kind of the real world interaction stuff. So there's a whole genre of content on YouTube Kids, which is drawing videos, like how to draw a flower. Like my kids, I have 6-year-old twins. They came to visit me for Take Your Kids to Work Day, and they saw this video a channel called Draw So Cute, where this woman draws these amazing sort of Japanese kind of cartoon characters. And she sort of breaks it down in steps, and here's how to do an ear, and here's the kind of cuddly cat. And so my 6-year-olds now really like to draw these Draw So Cute videos. Now, some of the user research that we've done on YouTube has actually shown that in some ways actually these seeing other kids have agency and take part in something, having in some sense less production values actually makes that more accessible and more in some sense inspiring of offline play. So I think I not wishing to not also say that there's a range of content, but I think it's important to really think about okay, if the goal is physical movement, drawing, families doing stuff together, there may be a new generation of creators, and sometimes PBS is not the best. I mean, as a PBS fan,
we have to kick to questions. We gotta go. Who in the audience has any questions? Oh, we have a lot of questions. This is good. Who should ask? You right there. Yeah.
One comment I've noticed, often I'll ask my 14-year-old, oh, what are you doing right now? And she's turned a noun into a verb. She says, I'm just YouTubing. I'll say, that's not a verb, right? What are you actually watching? What are you doing? But then I'm wondering if YouTube or Google will think about moving toward taking away the recommended video. I know you can turn off autoplay. Just as an educator, often our educators or faculty at my school don't want to use YouTube because a bunch of stuff comes up on the side that's not appropriate for, I work with middle school age girls. So.
Well, so first of all, I would say if you haven't already turned on restricted mode, that's probably a good start, especially in an education context. Secondly, I think obviously thinking about what is surfaced and what's next, how algorithms work, is a really complex and ongoing thing, and absolutely we are kind of considering what makes the best user experience, what will sort of meet people's expectations. There's a certain principle behind searching for something, which is that you want to get the content that you're searching for. So obviously historically our algorithms are really optimized for you search for this thing, here's some more stuff. What we are there's a user experience team, actually, one of the folks that's here, who's been doing some really fascinating research on how very little kids search for information and how they gain what we could call search literacy over time. And so they learn to refine their searches and put in different terms that help them identify what they're searching. In YouTube Kids, we have voice search, so you can search that way as well. And it actually also helps with literacy because it types out the words as you say them. But I think to answer your question in a sort of vague but honest way, yes, absolutely. We're thinking all the time about how those recommendations work. And I can't give you a potted answer of this is now what that's going to look like. But of course, it's something we think deeply about.
I think it would be also fascinating to kind of help kids understand why they got the results they got, like to kind of demystify the algorithm a little bit in terms of helping them build digital literacy. Because I think, in medicine, we have to be super transparent about every decision we're making and why we're ordering these tests and explaining my thinking to my patients. And my patients would think it was ridiculous, where I'm just like, here's the orders by. Go do this next thing. And so I feel like that could be part of some of the design changes, is having tech companies take on more transparency when they're dealing with kids, to really lay out, this is why you're getting this next thing, if an algorithm is involved. And if not, I think I've been having conversations with people about the importance of autonomy in early childhood, and like having kids understand that they're responsible for their next action and their next action, and whether that gets worn away a little bit when you are following a feed. And so, helping them understand, pause, think, what do you want to do next?
But what stronger way to give that to kids than show instead of telling them?
Right.
We should be leading by example. They should be looking for exactly what you're describing in the platforms that they're using, and then looking for that in other platforms.
Right.
And
Just
if they're
like
not seeing it,
right.
then
you'd look for that in a doctor, right?
Right.
If you had a doctor who was just bossing you around, you would not go back to that.
That seems to be the approach that at least we've had to take at Common Sense. It's informing and educating the parent, because they don't have the time to look at every YouTube video prior to their kid watching something, or look at every movie, et cetera. So here we provide an evaluative overlay. But it would be ideal, honestly, to be able to have that built in, that concept, into what kids are actually using.
Yeah, I think there's a balance here, which is about creating platforms that especially when we have, young kids in mind, that are helping them kind of understand how the platform itself works, and are giving them some information about. So actually just thinking, for example, of how we treat ads on YouTube Kids. We change the color of the bar that's at the bottom. There's bumpers that go before and after the ad. There's only a certain percentage of the content of the overall time watch can be ads. And so the idea is, yes, it is, and the ads are all kind of context-based. They don't require any personalization. So I think that it's really a good example of how to, within the kind of constraints of it's a free platform and it is ad-supported, and I think that's important to kind of have some access that isn't gated by subscription costs, which not everyone can afford. At the same time as thinking about how through our policies we can try to explain what's happening and give visual cues that okay, this is now commercial content, and I think there's obviously much more we can think about and iterate and work on in that area. But I think that's to Jenny's point about explaining to kids a little bit about what's going on and helping them kind of understand. I think that's especially in spaces that are really for kids explicitly, that there's a lot more we could do.
You read up here, yeah.
I was just wondering if YouTube or Google has worked with pediatricians like Jenny, or with Tristan Harris, or Tristan Harris's group specifically, to address many of his points and try to bring in people to change the design.
So with Tristan specifically, we recently went to his event in San Francisco, and there's a small round table that we participated in. So I think, not to sound funny, but I'm a researcher who's worked on kind of screen time and family media use for many years, and I was recruited by Google to this role. So I think actually, I can't speak for other tech companies, but at least at Google, there's been a real effort in the last few years to kind of bring both kind of in-house expertise and hiring folks from academia. There's a couple other folks here who come, from the kids media world, from the research world, from places like Common Sense. So I think, and we have others who work on the trust and safety side who've come from, literally I work with somebody who was a federal prosecutor who was working on, crimes against children. So I think there's a huge amount of effort to build in a lot of in-house expertise. And also, I think it's really important that we work with external experts and really hear, their perspectives on an ongoing basis. And so we've always kind of done that as a company, but that's definitely something that I've put a lot of emphasis on as my kind of insider-outsider role, and so we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, they hire researchers and bring them into the fold. You in the way back.
Yeah, in the first conversation thing, Tristan mentioned an interesting metric by which we can determine sort of the health of a technology. And I was wondering, Alicia, do your kids use YouTube Kids, and how often and on what devices?
They do. They do use YouTube Kids. I think one of the things that actually I was really struck, Nellie wrote an article, I don't know, a couple months ago, a year ago, which ironically was like it was about Silicon Valley families being fearful around technology, which was like ironically the most circulated parenting article in all of my like Bay Area parenting groups. So interestingly, like fear of technology in all these parenting groups on Facebook. But anyway, and I think that one of the things, I do a lot of talks for parents at schools, and when you say what you do, you get stopped at the school gates all the time, as I know these guys, I'm sure, do as well. And one of the things that I think is really important that I say to other parents based on my own experience as a parent, but really as a researcher, is like having an open and curious and like inquisitive attitude towards your children's digital interests is probably your like very first stop. And like understanding like the spectrum of different things that they could be interested in engaging with. Like there's things that my kids want to watch that I don't feel comfortable with, and it's my job to set boundaries around that. And I have to like actually sometimes explain to my 5-year-old like why I don't feel comfortable with them watching certain kinds of content on YouTube Kids or elsewhere. And that's actually, it's hard to do that. I'm really sympathetic to parents really struggling with that. But that is still, I think a lot of parents historically have been really focused on time and like watching the minutes on the clock, and have maybe been less actually questioning like, what are you doing? What do you like about it? How are you using it to connect? Are you able to disconnect when you need to? Like, what can we do to help with that? And I think that giving parents some of those like wider sets of questions and tools that don't just feel kind of punitive and don't just feel kind of limiting is probably a really good start. I know you guys have. Sorry, they do use YouTube Kids. Yes, I think I was mentioning Draw So Cute earlier.
Is Mark Bergen still in the room? Bergen? Do you want a question? You're the reporter on this beat. No pressure. Bergen.
Sorry, Alicia, one more question. I think we've established that YouTube Kids is for children under 13. I'm just curious why you still have exhaustive amounts of videos clearly targeted for kids on the main site.
I think this is actually back to my sort of earlier point about like what's parents' roles in this. So YouTube main is for 13 plus, and I think the expectation has always been that parents shouldn't have unsupervised children on YouTube main, and that's really like strongly encourage parents to understand it's a general audience site. It's not made for kids. YouTube Kids is made for kids. If you want your kids to have an unsupervised experience, that's where they should be. So, yeah.
Great. I think we're out of time, guys. Are we one more question? Yeah, go for it.
This session was about quality of content. I'm going to make a plug for quality of lack of content. Part of the reason that we have this problem is because parents have decided to use devices as the portable babysitter. I've seen it in clinic for the last 12 years, since 2007 when the iPad was invented. Bottom line, kids now do not know how to self-soothe because they've been basically opted out of childhood, that they are now basically not experiencing the ability to interact with their environment because they've been given an artificial one. And in the process, we've actually taken something away from them. So Piaget, famous child psychologist in the 20th century, famously said, play is the work of the child. Well, I would argue that he left peace out. Boredom is the opportunity of the child. And we are not allowing our kids to be bored. And in the process, we've got a problem.
I would just respond to that but with a little more specificity, is that some kids are having trouble self-soothing, not all. I mean, I see the kids who are struggling more with it. And I think that they are, there's also reasons like poverty and income inequality and trauma and lack of mental health services. And there are huge systematic structural reasons that kids are really struggling socially and emotionally right now. It's not just media. And media is often used in homes where there is a lot of stress. I've interviewed parents who are in homeless shelters who say, this is how I get quiet. And when he yells, I get triggered. And I get aroused, and I don't have anyone else to talk to, so this is how we get quiet in our house. So if you have that much of an emotional driver, and I'm not saying that's the right way for that parent to handle their distress in that moment, we need to find other ways instead of just saying you can't do it. I also will say there's a surprising study that found that when kids use mobile devices in primary care visits with their pediatricians, parents and pediatricians actually communicated better, and pediatricians were more accurate in their developmental assessments. It was the opposite of what they thought. And so it was just a good reminder that we have to test our assumptions.
That's fascinating.
We have to test them. And I'm not saying that we need to then promote use of mobile devices during primary care visits. We can have toys. We can have toys if you're not afraid of the germs that might collect on them, which is like the other reason that no one is playing in primary care pediatric offices right now, and they're all bringing their own safe little objects from home. The other reason is that it is a scary opportunity. You know, kids know they're coming in for vaccines, they act up. There's plenty of other social and emotional reasons why kids are distressed when they come into the visit. And I actually advocate this is a perfect teachable moment to talk about it. Oh, how are they feeling right now? What is that, how do you find that app that you just gave to them? What do you think they're feeling right now? How are we going to take that away? We're going to have to go do the exam. I want to play with them a little bit. I want to see their eyes. So we have to talk around it, because otherwise a lot of families feel alienated if we just feel like, do a hard stop. And I know that from my developmental behavioral training is there's lots of toddlers out there that if you just do a hard stop and say, no, you can't do this, they'll push back even harder. You have to give them a reason. You have to give them a replacement behavior. So we actually have to do the same with parents and not, and give them other options and things to do.
Teach me to self-soothe.
I know, I need to learn how to self-soothe. Guys, I think, I want to stay here for ever and hang out and debate because this is what I'm obsessed with, but I think there's a happy hour right now that's starting, so we should go.
Oh, no,
Thank you so much to all our speakers. And thank you to everyone for being here today, to all of our speakers. I do want to commend everyone for coming, working through these problems, working towards solutions. It's not easy, particularly those who work in industry, those who really are coming under scrutiny. And, I think we feel like the only way to get there is to both look for policy opportunities and look for the innovative capacity and the smarts and lots of good intention inside of these companies to really make shifts. And we're starting to see that. So we really appreciate, we can't get anywhere without having these conversations, and hopefully they can lead to real action. So thank you so much for being here. So yes, I see some wine through an open door out there. So please join us. The CMO from Firefox will be saying a couple remarks in a couple minutes, but enjoy, get to know one another a little bit better, have some beer, wine, refreshments, and check out the exhibits downstairs. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it.